Not all bread is created equal. And if you like yours soft, fluffy, moist, and delicious, then Hero Bread and Buns should be your first choice. But Hero Bread isn't just about taste and texture. It's high in fiber with ultra-low net carbs with 0 grams of sugar. Order today at hero.co and use the code AH10 to get 10% off your first purchase. That's AH10 at hero.co, HERO.co for 10% off your first purchase.
This is
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make It Plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, a new book out we want to take a look at, and its author will know, those of us who are close to and follow Talking Points Memo. He's an editor at large there. He's written 3, or at least 3, he's written several books, but at least 3 previous books leading up to this one, and it'll all come together. The Socialist Awakening, the Nationalist Revival, the Populist Explosion, and the Emerging Democratic Majority. He's co-authored those. But his latest kind of brings it all together very well. The Politics of Our Time. Populism, Nationalism, and Socialism. Our guest today on Make It Plain is John B. Judis. John, how are you?
I'm just dandy.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
So, in terms of the book, Populism, Nationalism, Socialism, which one is winning right now, John? I'll cut right to it.
I think we're actually in a kind of lull. We're in a period where it's not where there's a before, where we had a real populist explosion with Trump, Brexit, Europe. We had a big explosion of parties like the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany that was, polling at 2% in 2015 and suddenly became the major opposition party to the government. But I think during the pandemic and the recession that's hit, a lot of the countries have gone back to sort of old and tested or even technocratic in the case of France leadership. I mean, we have a 78-year-old guy who's been around in the Senate since the early 1970s leading the country. So I think that there is in some sense, a reversion to a kind of expertise, a feeling of insecurity that we have to have people who've been around, and a reluctance to bet on parties like the Trump Republicans or the Marine Le Pen in France or Corbyn in Britain.
So you mentioned the populism around Trump. But what's compare and contrast, or show us how they overlap, if at all, populism and nationalism?
Well, they overlap in the current times, and you can see this both in the United States and Europe. Populism pits in a people against an elite. Who the people are and who the elite is depend upon the time and the circumstances. They can be vastly different, but two terms. On the left, it's pretty much a relationship of the people versus the elite, and you're trying to do things like create greater equality. You're worried about corporations having too much power and moving overseas. On the right, you also have the same kind of thing, but in addition, you have scapegoating. And a lot of times the scapegoating takes the form of a foreign group, illegal immigrants in the United States, Muslims from Syria, Afghanistan, North Africa who are coming into Europe during the 2010s. So that encourages a kind of explicit nationalism. Nationalism is not something necessarily bad, but it can take a malignant form. And what you get with the populism on the right is a kind of malignant nationalism. Mexicans are rapists, that kind of stuff that we have heard a lot from Trump, beginning from the day he went down the escalator and announced his presidency in New York.
That makes sense. Where is socialism today? Is it growing? Is it more popular? Is it on the rise?
I would say, again, it's reached a kind of plateau. What struck me, I'm an old socialist from the 60s, but I was a different kind of socialist then. I was more of the Karl Marx kind of socialist, was that you started seeing this incredible thing in the 2010s or so, the end of the Obama years, where they take these polls of young people, and 50% would say, well, they prefer socialism to capitalism. Now, what did that mean? It really meant something like Scandinavia, a kind of advanced social democracy, cooperation rather than competition, caring about people, not the kind of cutthroat society we have, one with a very generous social safety net, anti-racism, anti-sexism, elements like that. So, yeah, I think we saw that. And with Bernie Sanders, it got the name publicly and very importantly of democratic socialism. Bernie, did very well in the primaries in 2016 and 2020, but there was a certain plateau he reached. And he reached it with people, mainly who grew up during the Cold War, age 40, 45 and over, who still identify socialism with the Soviet Union, communist China, or maybe today in the Venezuela, which was important in killing off Democrats among Cubans and other Latinos in South Florida during the election. So in that sense, it's reached a plateau, but we do have this kind of support in the Democratic Party for, what sometimes doesn't even have the name of socialism, but consists in more equality, greater role of government in the economy and trying to provide services for people, things like that.
Where does the new government fall in the spectrum, the Biden-Harris administration, in terms of populism, nationalism, and social? I think he's trying to be a populist president, I think. Am I wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. Much to my delight and surprise. He was, in 2015, he was assuring Wall Street people that there would be no change from a Biden presidency, but he, he's been moved by circumstances, and I give him a lot of credit for that. I think, there was pressure from the left in the Democratic Party, but there was pressure from the fact that he was facing a pandemic and a deep recession. And I think he learned something from the Obama years. Obama, during his first 2 years, didn't go big enough. And he didn't fight the Republicans. He wasn't willing to recognize that he wasn't going to get things by being bipartisan. So, he delayed the healthcare thing way past the time when he could have gotten a much stronger bill. He didn't go after the banks, et cetera, et cetera. And then he found himself in 2010 with a minority in Congress. And I think that Biden learned something from that, and he's proceeding in a much bolder way, and is taking in many respects a populist approach to, for instance, taxes on the wealthy, raising taxes on corporations. His relief program really is reminiscent of the New Deal. People are complaining now that it's making people reluctant to take jobs, because the economic benefits of unemployment benefits are so high. My reply to that is raise wages. And in fact, I think that's what you're going to find. You're going to find a lot of pressure, and we're hearing that already from Burger King and places like that they're going to have to raise wages in order to get people to work. That's all the better. That's what we want, because we've had this incredible demarcation in the country between the very rich and the very, people who are just barely getting by.
More MIP after this message. Now, you also write in your latest op-ed at Talking Points Memo that Biden and the Democrats would do well to observe very closely what's happening with the Labor Party in Britain too, right?
Yes, I think that the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States have very similar kinds of problems politically. They both have extremes on the left, and they're not economic extremes. They're more social and cultural that we could potentially discredit them with a lot of voters in the middle. You know, Britain, Boris Johnson really is hewing toward the center on both economics and social stuff. And that's what got him a lot of popularity. And that's what got him this big, successful election. A lot of the reason the Democrats were so successful in 2020 and won those two Senate races in Georgia, which was, you know, a miracle, was because of Trump. I mean, people identified the Republican Party with Trump, violence, extremism, you know, the worst kind of bigotry. Democrats, again, demands like defund the police. Also, I have to admit, the specter of socialism. Some of the most extreme demands about sexuality, that we shouldn't talk about males and females, that there's something wrong with the biology of that, are also going to land the Democrats in trouble in the same way they did the Labor Party in Britain. Again, feeling that we're not all Americans, that there's something wrong with being an American. I think in Britain, you had that same kind of sentiment within the Labor Party, and it killed the Labor Party among a lot of working class voters.
But John, and everything you said, though, the cat's already kind of out of the bag here in the States. I mean, it'd be kind of hard for Democrats, I would think. Would you not agree to walk back any of those positions? I mean, I think that it's pretty much out there.
Well, it's out there, but you know, there is a leadership in Congress and there's a president. And Biden's been doing his best to walk some of it back. I mean, he talks about reforming the police, not defunding the police. I mean, there are cities and towns in this country where that makes sense, but there's a lot of places, including where I live in Montgomery County, where it's just bewildering what people might even mean by that, because we don't have a lot of police brutality. There aren't the kind of incidents that sparked demonstrations in Minneapolis or Kenosha. So again, I think it is possible to walk that back in that sense, and I think that the Democrats nationally have to be very, very careful about that stuff, because look, I mean, you emphasize that stuff and you're going to end up electing Republicans who are going to screw exactly the people that you want to help in the first place. I mean, I've said that all along. I mean, in the New Left, we went way too off the deep end in the late 60s and early 70s. And that was, we ended up with Ronald Reagan, and he ended up hurting exactly the people that we wanted to help in the first place. So I think we have to be very careful with these social and cultural wedge issues to try to, again, stay down the middle and respect other people's point of view and not get into the extremes.
Well, with all due respect, there may not have been many demonstrations recently in Montgomery County, but I used to live in that area, and there's still a history of police violence, but it may not get the same reaction today. I wonder too, though, Biden replaced the Andrew Jackson portrait with FDR's. And is that a statement about him trying to be more populist and even trying to reach some of the people you're talking about in the middle and beyond, creating more jobs, creating an FDR type program? Isn't that an example of him trying to be more populist?
Sure. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt ran a populist campaign in 1936, for instance, where he talked about the economic royalists. Absolutely. Andrew Jackson, there were strong elements of populism, but also there was the Indian Wars. I mean, that's what Jackson became popular for, in part. So there was a dark side to Andrew Jackson, but I don't want to make this complicated, but Roosevelt himself was a big fan of Andrew Jackson because he, again, people didn't see the whole picture then.
in terms of in the intersection of populism and nationalism, I see Biden kind of doing that too, isn't he? Even with the vaccine. I mean, he's making it and it shows you how the circumstances shift and change. Populism with the vaccine for everybody, but making it say it's sort of your national responsibility. It's your citizen responsibility. It's your American responsibility to get vaccinated so you don't harm your neighbor. I mean, I see him kind of working that too. And it's amazing to see, because if that's working, isn't it, John? It's incredible that, how it shifts or goes 180 degrees in just 4 years, where Trump's populism / nationalism was make America great and racism and all of that, and specifically white nationalism. Right. And now Biden is saying populism, vaccines, infrastructure, jobs, and let's do something together as Americans. It's really interesting how that pendulum swings, isn't it?
Yes. And when he campaigned at the very end, and then after the campaign, he talked about making this the United States, and he would stress the word united. And in his talking about industry, he talks about bringing made in the USA back. So those are, to some extent, Trump themes, but that's the benign, not the malignant side of nationalism. The vaccine stuff and what's happened during the pandemic is really scary to me in some ways, because, there are a lot of things we got out of American individualism. You get Steve Jobs and Wozniak in a garage making computers as kids, and then Silicon Valley. Very hard to imagine that in a more structured, authoritarian business economy. But what's happened with the masks and the vaccine and the extent to which we really have taken so long to get this thing under control is scary. I'm not recommending this to the Biden administration or whatever, but I would like to see vaccination made compulsory. I'd like to see some way in which we made it like driver's licenses or whatever. And I think some businesses and institutions are doing that, because it's not just a matter of you're being free to do something. You're harming somebody else by not doing it. So again, I think that's an issue where American individualism has really gotten in the way of our having a successful plan to get rid of this pandemic. You would make it compulsory. Well, yeah, I don't know how it would work, and this Supreme Court would throw it out in a second. So I say, businesses, institutions, schools, that's fine with me. If I go to a baseball game, if there was a way to do it, if we could certify people, if it wasn't a situation where people were selling cards over eBay, which has already started to happen, I would like to see vaccination made in some sense compulsory, so people can be free to go about their normal lives once again. More MIP after this message. You mentioned that we're kind of at a plateau in all of this. What will bring either of these isms, do you think, back on the rise again? I'm really looking towards this 2022 election. Mm-hmm. Let's put it this way. I mean, we are in a situation in the United States where, and this is, to some extent true in Europe too, where we're really going to have a much stronger government intervention in the economy. I think everybody understands that. Even when there's no recession, I think the idea, again, of relying on China to make our pills is not going to work. I mean, we're going to have to bring things back. Climate change, we're going to have to make big changes. So is that going to come from the left? Again, going back to the 30s. Is it going to be like the New Deal, or is it going to come from the right? Is it going to be more, again, a kind of malignant nationalism, fascism, whatever you want to call it? So I think that's a big battle. And I'm just hoping that Biden can push us in the right direction on this. What worries me again is that we'll have a Republican House in 2022, and we'll really have a kind of stalemate in this country the way we had in 2014, for instance, where we don't get things done, where a lot of people blame the Democrats for it, and then we get the Republicans back, and where we'll have a kind of seesaw in the country and really won't get past this kind of position of the term I use is unstable equilibrium, where the first you get one side, first you get the other side, and then there's this very basic things like getting the right to health care for everybody just doesn't get done, and you get this kind of jerry-built programs that when Biden comes in, he's doing things that are necessary to really strengthen it, but they can easily be taken away in 2 years. So again, that's my worry, and I'm really looking at that election.
Its potential, though, I want to stay in line with your 2022 concern.
Yeah.
But it seems to me what we saw in 2012, the overwhelming effort to suppress the vote actually motivated more voters.
Right.
We're seeing that again now. Hopefully that will be the case again in 2022. More states are doing it than ever before, all these new voter restrictions as that. And then we're just hearing this week, the Supreme Court is going to hear the case that could finally, for them, and what they were pointing to do, scuttle Roe. Now, if you threaten people's voting rights and take away the right of women to their own privacy once and for all, I don't know, John. I think that you get rid of that plateau in either populism or socialism, and to some extent, nationalism, the benign.
So yes, there can be things that are done like sanctioning states to prohibit abortion that would really push things. I think would give Democrats a lot of advantages. I agree with you about the voting rights stuff. I think that some of that can backfire, but the by-elections, these 2022, the midterm elections, people generally just do not come out as much as they do in the 2024s and 2028. So I am worried about it. You have two elections. You have Mark Kelly in Arizona, and you have Raphael Warnock in Georgia. Those are both going to come up in 2022, and those are really tests because those are both states that the Republicans are trying to suppress the vote. And I think there's reasons to worry about the Hispanic vote in Arizona, and there's a worry about the Black vote in Georgia. So we'll see. But a lot of the things they've done, like the mail-in voting, would screw people up during a pandemic. If we're past the pandemic, again, I'm not sure if the specific things they're passing are going to be that damaging. So we'll have to see. I would like to see the Democrats, instead of concentrating on this 800-page bill about voting, to focus on one or two things that it would make it very hard for the Republicans to resist, like voting on Sunday or making the voting day, the Tuesday, a national holiday. Both of those would increase turnout immeasurably, and it would be very hard for the Republicans to say, this is unacceptable. So instead, they have hundreds of provisions, some of which are, including DC Estate, which of course I support, but the Manchin, for instance, from West Virginia, the senator, will not support. So again, focus on a few things that would really open up the electoral system.
Well, John, I respectfully disagree. I don't think Republicans are going to accept even those. I don't think they're going to accept anything. And you're right; those things are fundamental, but they've been a part of the discussion, as you know, for decades too. If Democrats said national holiday or Sunday, they still fight it. And we know even in some of these states, that's exactly what happened. It happened in Georgia. They took away a lot of souls to the polls. So it looks like they're going to resist whatever. You mentioned Joe Manchin. What category does he fall in, or does he deserve his own category in this, like maybe assholism or something? What?
He's a centrist Democrat. You should get down on your knees and thank God that we have him, because otherwise, we wouldn't have a majority. And he's in a state that's gone for Trump, 70 to 30, 75, 25. So
But
You
but
know,
do
you
we
just
have
have
a
to
majority
accept
with
that.
him? Do we have a majority with him now? I mean, he's blocking everything. It's almost like, what purpose is he serving if he's serving the block so much?
You wouldn't have the relief bill without him. He was the crucial vote.
Yeah, that's one
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, and
But
you'll get other things. There'll be other measures that he'll support. But yeah, I mean, it would be better to have a larger majority. It would be better to have had one Maine. It would Iowa. There were a lot of there were several Senate races that we could have won, and they're coming up in 2022 too, in Pennsylvania, Ohio. Few other states where Democrats could increase their margin in the Senate rather than reduce it.
folks, the politics of our time: populism, nationalism, socialism, with John Judis, his latest. Be sure to check it out. Available wherever you get your books. Congratulations, John, on the book. Are you doing? I guess you're doing a book tour. You're probably doing one virtually, right?
Unfortunately, I like doing the book tours too, because you see people's reaction and stuff.
Right, you get to interact
It's
with
a
them.
real drag with the Zoom stuff.
Yeah. Also, folks, be sure to check him out at Talking Points Memo as well, talkingpointsmemo.com. John, thank you for joining us on Make It Plain, buddy.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
Be a barbecue hero with delicious, ultra-low net carb hero bread, buns, and tortillas. Soft and fluffy, high in fiber, and with 0 grams of sugar, up to 10 grams of protein, coming in at under 100 calories per serving. Oh, and did I mention they taste like their mouth-watering traditional versions? I mean, what's not to love? Use code AH10 for 10% off your first hero bread purchase at hero.co. That's AH10 for 10% off at hero.co.